Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about my week number 16 waiver wire pickups for fantasy football in 2021. Inside today's video, we're going to be breaking down some running backs, wide receivers, as well as tight ends that I believe you guys should be looking to pick up off the waiver wire right now. But before we could get on into things, I would like to ask, if you are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, to please make sure that you do hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you hit that like button down below. It would help us out a ton. And if you would like to follow me on Twitter, please do so at NotoriousFNTSY. So without further ado, let's get into my week number 16 waiver wire pickups. We begin with my number 1 overall waiver wire pickup of the week, and that is Ronald Jones, running back of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, going up against the Carolina Panthers this week in Carolina. Ian Rappaport reported that Leonard Fournette avoided a serious hamstring injury, but will be missing a game or two. This is going to elevate Ronald Jones to be the clear number 1 lead running back on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. In Leonard Fournette's absence at the end of the game up against the New Orleans Saints, Ronald Jones had 8 rushes for 63 yards, as well as 2 receptions on 2 targets for 8 yards. This is a matchup up against the Carolina Panthers where the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to look to bounce back. They just lost in an embarrassing fashion up against the New Orleans Saints. They won't have Mike Evans. They won't have Chris Godwin. And while technically Ronald Jones did, quote-unquote, lose his job to Leonard Fournette this season, Ronald Jones is far from a bad running back. I think he is going to have a lot of success in this role until Leonard Fournette does end up returning. So Ronald Jones is in the perfect situation right now to win you your fantasy football championship. So I love Ronald Jones this week up against the Carolina Panthers. Next up, we move to Amon-Ra St.Brown, wide receiver of the Detroit Lions, going up against the Atlanta Falcons this week in Atlanta. Amon-Ra St.Brown is the clear number 1 wide receiver in Detroit with over 11 targets in each of the last 3 games. The other 2 games that were not last week where he had 11 targets, he had 12 targets in each of those games. Last week up against the Arizona Cardinals, a game that the Detroit Lions dominated all game long. Surprisingly, Amon-Ra St.Brown had 8 receptions on 11 targets for 90 yards, as well as a touchdown. He also had 1 rush for 5 yards. So Amon-Ra St.Brown, at this point in the season, is the clear number 1 wide receiver. I know all year long, it was very hard to decipher who the number 1 wide receiver is. One week, it's Khalif Raymond. The next week, it's Amon-Ra St.Brown. Then Josh Reynolds appears, and he's the number 1 wide receiver. But over the last 3 weeks, Amon-Ra St.Brown really has shown that consistency, especially in a volume standpoint, that he is just going to be seeing so many targets game in and game out. And the Atlanta Falcons defense is pretty dog shit, so I think it wouldn't be surprising at all if Amon-Ra St.Brown had a top 12 performance this week up against the Atlanta Falcons. Next up, we move to Gabriel Davis, wide receiver of the Buffalo Bills, going up against the New England Patriots in New England. If Emmanuel Sanders misses again, Davis is going to slot into the number 2 wide receiver role for the Buffalo Bills. We also know that Cole Beasley is out now due to COVID, so even if Emmanuel Sanders was to return, I think that Gabriel Davis is still in a scenario where he's basically a must-start wide receiver. Week 15 up against the Carolina Panthers, he had 5 receptions on 7 targets for 85 yards, and not 1, but 2 touchdowns, scoring 4 total touchdowns in the last 3 games. This is far from the ideal matchup, obviously, up against the New England Patriots, but I project that this game is going to look a lot different than the last time these two teams played. Why is that? Because there's not going to be 50,000 mile-an-hour fucking winds to make them run the ball a million times. I think Gabriel Davis will have a ton of success up against the New England Patriots. Next up, we move to Samaje Perine, running back of the Cincinnati Bengals, going up against the Baltimore Ravens this week. Bengals head coach Zach Taylor said that Joe Mixon suffered an ankle sprain on Sunday up against the Denver Broncos. Zach Taylor did seem hopeful that Mixon would be back this week, but he did state that he will start the week in limited fashion in terms of practice. If Joe Mixon returns, then Perine basically has absolutely 0 fantasy relevance, but without Mixon, he becomes a running back that could potentially finish as a top 24 running back on the week in week 15 up against the Denver Broncos. After we saw Joe Mixon get hurt, we saw Samaje Perine have 4 rushes for 30 yards, as well as 2 receptions on 2 targets for 13 yards. Is Samaje Perine a locked and loaded running back one without Joe Mixon? No, but I do believe that he definitely has fantasy value, and if you you do have Joe Mixon on your team, I would tell you that you 100% have to pick Samaje Perine up, unless maybe later tonight it comes out that Joe Mixon is going to be just fine, but I honestly doubt we're going to hear that until Sunday. Next up, we move to Justin Jackson, running back of the LA Chargers, going up against the Houston Texans in Houston. Austin Eckler was reported to be placed on the reserve/COVID list, but according to the official NFL transaction wire, Eckler was not among the players placed on that list, so that is definitely a situation that you want to be monitoring. Even if Eckler does end up playing, based upon what we saw last week up against the Kansas City Chiefs, Justin Jackson still does have at least a little bit of value if Austin Eckler is healthy. In that game up against the Chiefs, we saw Justin Jackson have 13 rushes for 86 yards, as well as 1 reception on 1 target for 13 yards. Obviously, if you pick up Justin Jackson, his value is immensely higher without Austin Eckler. My best guess right now is that's probably 50-50 if Austin Eckler ends up playing or not. So if you have Austin Eckler on your team, you certainly want to go ahead and head to the waiver wire and pick up Justin Jackson. But before we talk about my next waiver wire pickup, we have partnered with Yahoo Fantasy this NFL season to bring you guys some great offers. Check out our exclusive limited time offer, which gets you guys 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. To qualify, you need to be new to Yahoo, sign up for an account via the link down below, deposit and play. That's it. Yahoo will send us your name after you play in your first paid contest, and we'll reach out to you via email with your coupon. If you would like immediate access, that's okay as well. All you got to do is email support@awesemo.com and we will get you set up. You can also claim a free $10 of site credit by clicking the link in the video description down below, which could be used to enter any Yahoo contest, including the $1 million NFL Baller. Make sure to use our DFS tools and projections designed specifically for Yahoo to give you guys the best shot at winning big. Please make sure you check out Yahoo Fantasy, link down below in the description. My next player to talk about as the waiver wire pickup is Allen Lazard, wide receiver of the Green Bay Packers, going up against the Cleveland Browns this week. So the Packers have placed MVS Marquez Valdes-Scantling on the COVID list. So Allen Lazard should be slotting in as the number 2 wide receiver behind Davante Adams if Marquez Valdes-Scantling is not good to go. Now, in the original draft of this waiver wire pickups video, I wrote about MVS because it seemed like he was the number 2 wide receiver, but now, obviously, with the likelihood of him playing not very high, especially since the game is on Saturday, I do believe that Allen Lazard will now be the number 2 wide receiver on the team. Last week, up against the Baltimore Ravens, he had 2 receptions on 4 targets for 23 yards, as well as 1 rush for 5 yards. In that game, MVS really flourished, but obviously without MVS, Allen Lazard is going to be the number 2 guy, so I would definitely pick him up. Next up, we move to a tight end, the only tight end in today's video, and that is Kmet, tight end of the Chicago Bears, going up against the Seattle Seahawks this week. In Seattle, going up against the Seahawks, we should see Kmet have a very strong performance following a great performance last week up against the Minnesota Vikings. In that game, he had 6 receptions on 9 targets. Very nice. 6 of 9 for 71 yards. Kmet hasn't had the most consistent of seasons, but we did see last week he looked a lot better, and I think with Justin Fields kind of finding his groove. Now, obviously, the Bears aren't going to be great because Matt Nagy is a certified fucking idiot. I don't know how the guy still has a job, but at the end of the day, Kmet has been just fine even with Matt Nagy, so I definitely like him this week up against the Seahawks defense. Next up, we move to Laquon Treadwell, wide receiver of the Jacksonville Jaguars, going up against the New York Jumbo Jets this week in MetLife. Weirdly enough, Treadwell appears to be the number 1 option on the Jacksonville Jaguars over the guys that we actually thought were to be the number 1 wide receiver, like Marvin Jones and Laviska Shenault. Last week up against the Houston Texans, he also went 6 of 9, 6 receptions on 9 targets for 57 yards. This matchup up against the Jets is a wet dream, and without Urban Meyer, I think that Laquon Treadwell can absolutely flourish in this scenario. Again, seems like he's the number 1 wide receiver, even though all offseason the debate was, is it going to be Shenault? Is it going to be Jones? Is it going to be DJ Chark? Turns out, by the end of the season, the answer was Laquon Treadwell. Who would have figured that out? Very funny, if I'm being honest with you. I'm pretty shocked that Treadwell has been this successful. Next up, we move to Duke Johnson, running back of the Miami Dolphins, going up against the New Orleans Saints in New Orleans on Monday Night Football. Duke Johnson was signed to the active roster on Monday following his excellent performance last week up against the Jets. Week 15 against the Jets, he had 22 carries for 107 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had 1 reception on 1 target for 20 yards, though it is still very unknown, at least in my opinion, on how much usage Duke Johnson will be seeing going forward. Since Gaskin did not practice all week last week, that could be the reason why we saw Myles Gaskin have a lessened workload, and we saw Duke Johnson really take over. But we could also see the scenario that, hey, Duke Johnson played so well, so now maybe he's the number one running back going forward on the Dolphins. Now, I think he's worthy of an ad because of the fact that maybe next week you can play him with a lot of confidence, but this week I am not very confident in either Duke Johnson or Myles Gaskin because I think this could really be a scenario where Duke Johnson takes over. He was really running a lot better than Gaskin in that game. And final player to discuss as a waiver wire pickup is Tyler Johnson, wide receiver of the Buccaneers, going up against the Carolina Panthers this week. Chris Godwin is out for the season after suffering a torn ACL last week. Mike Evans in that exact same game suffered a hamstring strain and is considered week to week. Now this is going to elevate Tyler Johnson into the number 2 wide receiver role, as it is believed that Antonio Brown will be returning this week. In week 15 up against the Saints, Johnson had 4 receptions on 7 targets for 41 yards. Now they do have other wide receivers on the team who could potentially elevate past Tyler Johnson, so I don't want to say that it is necessarily a lock that he's the number 2 guy, but based upon what we've seen this season, Tyler Johnson has been kind of the number 3, number 4 wide receiver on the team. I think now without Godwin, without Evans, with AB being brought back, that he will be the number 2 wide receiver in this scenario. I think Tom Brady has a bounce back game, so I really like Tyler Johnson up against the Carolina Panthers. So thank you guys all so much for watching today's video. If you did end up enjoying, please make sure to hit that like button as well as that subscribe button down below. I love you guys all. I hope you have a great rest of your guys' day. Make sure you check out Yahoo Fantasy. Link down below in the description. Have a great rest of your guys' day. As always, good boy.